Hi, Rachel. Lovely to see you today.
Hi, Kelly.
It's great to have Rachel on today. She will be talking about what she does with the Davis Dyslexia program and give us a little bit of detail on how, what, when, who, and hopefully people will have a better idea about what happens when you go and see people like Rachel. Just to let everyone know that Davis Dyslexia has facilitators countrywide, and it's probably a good idea to go and have a look on the Davis Dyslexia site, which is dyslexia.com, isn't it, Rachel?
It's davisdyslexia.com. Yeah.
davisdyslexia.com to find a facilitator around where you are, or perhaps a facilitator that does an online program. So Rachel, I'm going to basically hand it over to you, and if we could start off with, what's your background story? What's your background to this?
Thank you, Kelly, and thank you for this opportunity. I think it's really important that people hear about this work and the difference it can make in young people's lives, but also in adults' lives as well. So my background story is I had a friend 20 years ago who was dyslexic, and in trying to help him, I read Ron Davis's book called The Gift of Dyslexia, and it made a big difference for him just to acknowledge his dyslexia, but I had no idea how I could really help him. And I kind of parked that because I was busy doing other things in my life. And then I had the opportunity to train. But in between, I had worked in several settings where there was lots of really bright people, like my friend, super bright people, in fact, who struggled with what you think is the basics of reading and writing and spelling, and in some cases, mathematics. And I struggled to be able to help them with what I call traditional literacy tools. You know, I was a literacy and numeracy facilitator, working first in the prison environment and then in the wānanga space, and had all these, you know, conventional tools. But they really didn't make a difference to that group who were really bright and able, but had barriers to being able to really read and understand what they were reading, and often write that academic, you know, whether it was a sentence or a whole essay, they struggled with that. And it was clearly painful for them. So then I had this kind of gap in opportunity in my life to go and study, to become a facilitator. And that's really been my motivation, is to help those students, and starting young, because if you address the issues when people are young, then it doesn't become a lifelong issue or a lifelong battle.
A lifelong burden, yeah.
Yeah.
As you know, I'm dyslexic myself, and
yes.
I was one of the very few in my generation who were actually diagnosed dyslexic at about 11 years old. And had I not been, I could have very easily just fallen into that category of very bright, but absolutely no ability to communicate my brightness, basically. And being literate and numerate is really, really important in being able to communicate, first and foremost, and an absolute necessity to be able to express your intelligence, basically, or yes, your ability to, your potential. So could you give some background about Davis Dyslexia?
Yes, so Ron Davis himself was born dyslexic and autistic, and was really consigned to special needs type student in school. And it was only through his own ingenuity he started getting interested in clay about the age of 12, and making things out of this red clay from where he lived in California. And he eventually made all the letters of the alphabet and taught himself the alphabet, and eventually to read by the age of 20. which seems Herculean, right?
Yeah,
But
absolutely.
then he went on to become a mechanical engineer and an artist. And in his 30s, he was working with his artistic friends and discovered that he was at his most dyslexic. He says he was at his dyslexic worst when he was at his creative best.
Mm-hmm.
And that became his inquiry question, why? And why were his friends like that as well, his artistic friends? And so he started to look at it from an engineering perspective, like, why is it not a permanent thing? Why is it that some days I can't read well and other days it's okay?
Fine, yeah.
Right. And so he came across this concept or this idea of disorientation, that when we're in our creative mode, if you like, we disorientate, which is quite a pleasant experience sometimes, like we're, all these great ideas, but we can't focus our picture thinking mind, if you like, or our creative mind on what are symbols on the page, which is what text is made of. Every letter is a symbol and every word is a group of symbols. And when he discovered that, he started to see that it varied, then he realized one could control it oneself. And he started to develop processes, if you like, or tools, which we call them now, to be able to individually control our brain so that when we need to look at symbols as dyslexics, we can see them clearly with our mind and therefore interpret them accurately, therefore get the meaning out of those symbols.
Yeah.
So that's the background. That was back in the 80s. And he's done a lifetime of work. He and his wife, they just recently retired. He's in his 80s now, and really handed over this wealth of knowledge and research and working with people around the world, and has developed these programs, the Davis programs, and the training and the background for people like myself to be a facilitator.
Yes.
Yeah, so that's kind of the background to how it came to be, and it's a worldwide organisation, and there's about 500 facilitators around the world now.
Well, the interesting thing is that a lot of what he came up with in a practical sense is now being backed up in a neurobiological sense.
Yes.
And as you know, I've written a paper that actually is on the Davis Dyslexia research site, and that is explaining that exactly, that neurodiversity is basically, which a neurodiversity takes in dyslexia, all the dysses, and ADHD and ASD, or autism spectrum disorder, is basically a right brain dominance problem, or not problem, because I don't see it as a problem. It's a right brain dominance, full stop. Yes. And that's why the creative mode is the place that switches it on most, because our creative mind is the right side of is our right hemisphere. So
yes,
really, really interesting that he could have been relegated to the special needs pile and left there if it hadn't been for his incredible resilience and intelligence. So
and that he's gone on, as well as developing all the work for those of us who have dyslexia, he's developed and created the Ron Davis Autism Foundation. So
yes,
also working with people on the autism spectrum, and as much as I'm passionate about helping people with dyslexia, when you look and you unpack the challenges with autism, it's a phenomenal body of work that he's made available to the world to help people and their families navigate the challenges of autism and how to have life work really, really well for them and their person.
Yes, definitely. And what I love about Ron Davis is that he works with the whole person. For all his ASD, he is an incredibly empathetic, very, very, actually very spiritual person. Which actually is another trait of being a right brain dominant person as well.
Yeah, and I think the more I work with clients, the more I see a different interpretation of empathy.
Yeah.
And that someone on the ASD spectrum will have immense empathy. It just gets expressed in a different way.
Mm-hmm.
But it can be very deep, and it can be quite impactful if not kind of that people are not aware.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it's helped me understand, I have people in my life with ASD or on the spectrum. And the more I sort of work in this space, the more I have massive room for the different ways that they express it.
Absolutely. And as Ron says, it's actually an oversensitivity, not a lack of sensitivity.
Yes.
So his whole perspective is a paradigm shift for many, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So what does a Davis Dyslexia program look like, briefly?
Well, it's one-on-one.
Yeah.
And it's has an intensive component, I guess is the right word, and then there's follow-up. So the intensive component is over 30 hours, generally, depending on the age of the client and their attention span, it's usually over 1 week. So 30 hours presented over a 5-day period. For younger children, we might do it over 2 weeks. And it's focused on a mix of mostly tactile activities. We work with plastilina clay as a medium of learning and a set of tools. Let me talk about the tools first. These are what we call the Davis tools, which help with that process of switching, if you like, from a process of right brain thinking, that disorientated space, which is very creative, but gets in the way of us being able to see symbols. Be able to switch that off.
Brain function.
To switch it off to be able to read symbols in 2D. And we have a range of 4 or 5 different tools. So we start with learning those tools and practicing those tools, and then we move into working with clay. And it's a process of mastery. So we master the alphabets, upper and lower case, because that's the raw ingredients of words. And once you have what I like to say is a clean or clear 3D relationship with the alphabets, then words become less problematic.
Yeah.
And what we're also doing is connecting the shapes of the words with the names of the words, with the sounds of those letters, the letters.
Yeah.
So yeah. And then we move on to mastering punctuation marks, which cause a surprising number of people distress, either because they don't know what they're for, or the shapes can cause a disorientation. So we work a little bit of work on that. And then we start with some basic reading methods, which are picture-based, right? And then we work with mastering words. So we start with a noun, then a verb, then an adjective. And we start with picture-based words. But there are 220 beautiful words in our English language that have no natural picture. So like and but and if and so and saw. Those words really confound a dyslexic reader because there's no picture. So often they occur as a blank, which can seem like when you're reading a blank or a skip, if you like, in the reading, or just create confusion. Or clever dyslexics, which most of us are, will substitute a word in. So instead of the word might be written as home, there's no picture for home, no natural picture. So a dyslexic will put in the word house as a picture. But then it's not quite the same. The meaning is not quite the same. And then you just get compounding confusions.
Yes, absolutely. As a dyslexic, I know that at the beginning of a text, it's fairly easy going, but by the time you get to the bottom, all the confusions that have happened along the way make it worse and worse and worse.
Yeah,
so,
they compound. And then you have the upsets, if you like, and in some cases with some students, the temper upsets.
The frustration.
Because the frustration has got so high, the level of confusion has got so high because they got to pile up. And the person just, explodes or runs out of the room or, I had a stepson like that. And, yeah, it's understandable, but people see that as a behavioural issue versus, no, it's a learning issue that's gone wrong.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? And hasn't been interrupted and put right. So we do that, and then we move into making the models of those non-picture words. And we start that journey, but there's 220, so you can't get them all done in a week. So we put together a schedule of mastering those over 6 to 12 months. And so the support, the follow-up support, is really important to make sure those tools are being practiced regularly, like sometimes hourly, certainly daily, and also mastering those 220 words. And every 50 or so words that someone masters, their reading capacity just goes up a huge notch. And I've seen that particularly with some young learners I've worked with, is how quickly they've progressed, in a matter of months, from being non-readers to being able to read whole paragraphs with very few errors and much more ease. And they get to this point, which is the most exciting bit, is where they start to see what I call the movies in your mind.
Yeah.
Right? So as they're reading, their mind is generating the pictures with what they're reading, and it suddenly goes from being what I describe as like eating dry wheat bix with no sugar and milk to a full-blown 3D surround sound movie happening in your head, which is how reading was supposed to be.
Yes.
How reading was always supposed to be, but for many of us, that never happened.
No, that the whole obsession with barking out words,
yes,
is yes.
Yes.
It doesn't matter if you can actually say the word, but if you cannot comprehend all those words together are telling you, then you might as well not read at all.
Yeah, and some dyslexics, we're so clever, because most dyslexics have a higher than average IQ. And I worked with a 16-year-old last year, and she was just getting through school, but there were obviously some issues. And she got to that point, and she read for me. And I said, well, actually, your reading accuracy is quite good. Like, I wouldn't even have thought she was dyslexic. I said, so why are you here? She said, I don't understand a word of what I just read. And she's 16. I said, so how have you been getting through school? She said, I have really good friends who interpret everything for me. I went, oh. She said, but what I can't do is I can't write my own essays. She said, I can't even get the words in my head onto paper. And so we worked with a fairly classic dyslexia program with her, but the focus was getting her to a stage where she could write. And she, at the end of the week, wrote this beautiful story about her trip back to South Africa with her family to see the game park. It was so vivid. It was just beautiful. And that was to me, I think it was such a gift to her that she got to express what was in her head, but she hadn't been able to draw out onto paper. And she read it out to her very staunch South African family, and they were just blown away with what she had accomplished in that week.
In a week.
That had always been inside her. Do you know?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Like I've said to you before, Rachel, picture thinkers, we have these magnificent pictures in our heads, and a picture speaks 1,000 words. You try and get that picture out of your head into your out of your mouth.
Yes.
It's really difficult. It's really difficult. And I know, I get really frustrated sometimes, not so much with other people, but with myself, because I cannot get other people to understand what I am seeing in my head.
Yes.
And no matter what the words are, those people are not seeing that picture.
Yes.
And it's wonderful when people do see that picture, but it's really frustrating when they don't. So yeah.
No, I totally get it. And I think that is the frustration for so many young people, particularly, who come to see me, and I'll say, how's this, how's that, and how's writing? And usually it's like pretty bleat. There's another word in there. And I go, what happens? And they go, I just have all these ideas, but I have no way of writing them down. Yeah. And I just think, gosh, all that locked up creativity. They can draw me a picture, an amazing picture of something. But if they were to describe it in words, it's like mostly they'll go, oh, it's pretty hard, or those other words we shouldn't use. You know, and you can just see the frustration in their face and in their body language. And I'm just interested in, let's convert that frustration energy into creative power.
And to be honest, you know, when you've got this picture in your head and you want to get all these words onto the paper or even out your mouth quite often, you get to the point where you think, well, it's almost an impossible task. So actually being able to get a dyslexic or a neurodiverse person to actually focus on what is important to get on the paper or express yourself is probably part of the whole battle, really. And I think, Davis, the tools definitely give you the ability to do that, to focus, don't they?
And that's the other aspect. We've talked a lot about dyslexia, but you know, there are people like myself who are on what I call the neurodiversity spectrum, or even now talking about it as a helix, because we seem to have a few things going on, which I love that picture of a helix. And you know, that focus thing is so important, because again, we've got lots of really creative ideas, but actually being able to pin one down and follow it through to producing something of value in the world seems really difficult at times. And, you know, when I work with clients who have that issue, you know, it's heartbreaking at times, because there's just this world of creativity around and in them. And yet being able to express it in the world so that others can enjoy it, benefit from it. They might even get paid for it, you know, all of that gets thwarted by the other way that disorientation impacts those of us with ADD. It's, you know, the dispersed attention or the interrupted attention. Yeah, it's not that we lack attention. We can be hyper-focused at times, but it's all of the things that come in to kind of dissipate it or drag it away from.
It's a hypersensitivity, isn't it? Really, because you're it's an inability to cut out all the extraneous stuff that typical, and I put that in, people can do, like listening to you. I can also hear the rain going on, but and in my most ADD moments, and I am pretty sure I have a touch of that too. You know, I would be distracted by the rain, or and it also depends on the situation and how you're feeling and all the things that.
And what's been happening. So if you're tired, I notice when I'm tired, my threshold for focus just goes through the floor. So, you know, I get distracted.
I guess.
Or if we're hungry, and that's why, you know, making sure kids have got a good breakfast at school is really important, because if you're really hungry, you really can't focus on much else.
Or thirsty or whatever.
You know. Or in pain. So there's all these things. And that's half of what I work on with my clients is breakfast, sleep, dealing with other stuff that are taking your attention away so that you can just focus on what's important.
Exactly.
And our modern world, I have to say, is not that helpful. In fact, that it's a detriment to that, because all sorts of things come in to interrupt our super precious focus all the time. I remember when I was trying to do master's papers, and I had 4 stepkids at that point, and one of them invariably would walk in when I just arranged all of the important things into a coherent sentence, one of those academic sentences, right? And a young child would come in and go, when's tea? And I'm like, do you have any idea how many words and how long it took me to assemble those words in the order that was really working? It took me 20 minutes to get back, and I'd never seemed to quite get back to that perfect sentence that I had before.
And it doesn't even have to be something like that. I found that when I was writing my master's as well, I would get this perfect sentence, but it would be in my head. And then when I started writing it, it would be gone. And I'd be like, where's it gone? And then I'd have to restructure it, you know?
Yeah. And it's never the same.
No, never ever the same.
So, you know, the tools, and I didn't have the tools that I have now, so I hadn't trained back then, and, you know, the tools would be really helpful should I decide to put myself through that pain ever again, to marshal one's energies and thoughts.
Exactly. It's been lovely to speak to you, Rachel. We won't go on for too long because otherwise people lose interest.
Yes, lose focus.
Yes, exactly. Just before you go, do you do online courses, or is it basically face-to-face, and how do people get hold of you?
Yes, so have a few offerings. A couple of them are online, and one is face-to-face or in person, I guess is how we say it now, because it's all face-to-face, isn't it?
Yeah.
So I do online webinars, free webinars, which are really about to kind of showcase the work that we do, and some programs that are available online. And they're based on a program called the Why Tyrannosaurus, but Not If Parent and Tutor Support course, which was created by another facilitator in the UK, Richard Whitehead. So I deliver webinars about that, and also online courses, so 6-session courses for parents and tutors who really want to support their young people. And then I often will do, you know, initial consultations and some follow-up work online, but mostly the intensive programs I prefer to do in person because it's tactile and it's just, I think, a little bit easier to maintain focus. But a number of us are experimenting with doing that online. It just takes another level of sort of focus and organisation, and dependent on the age and the independence of the learner, really, whether they, and a lot of people are like, oh, I don't want to do any more online. So it's balancing that out. But progressively, we're trying different things that can work online so that we can, you know, work with people who just may not be able to come together for whatever reason. And how people can get hold of me. So my website is masterdyslexia.co.nz. So it's probably the best places to search for me there, or to email me at rachel@masterdyslexia.co.nz.
And of course, Rachel, you're on the ARC Education.
Yes, of course. Yes, so I'm on the ARC platform, ARC Education platform, and I'm based in Kapiti, but work with people generally across this, like the Wellington, Manawatu region. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining me, and it's been fantastic speaking to you. It is a subject that's very close to my heart, and part of my passion around being a teacher and teaching. And so I really privileged to actually have you on board with us, seeing as we are an ARC.
Yes.
And I hope that people will make contact with you as soon as possible.
Thank you,
Rachel.
Thank you, Kelly.